Today we are very, very, very blessed, and I begin by saying Alhamdulillah, thank God Almighty for blessing us to have some very prominent people, very well-known people, international figures with us here, personalities, and hence we consider that a mercy and a blessing from God. And credit goes to Colonel Lemke, the chaplain of the U.S. South Command, for making this happen by the mercy of God and the guidance of God Almighty. So at this point in time, what I want to do, I want to introduce our panelists. So I begin with a very well-known person. I have come to know him over the past 2 or 3 days at the symposium at the U.S. South Command, and he is on the right. And I'm sure the camera will zoom into Mr. Dr. James Wallace. He is an expert on international affairs. So here is an opportunity to ask a man who have that experience, that knowledge, that background, that experience with people worldwide. He's also a consultant to the U.S. government on international affairs and policy. And that has always been a question that many people have, policy. He's an expert on religion. He has been a religious leader or a pastor for more than 25 years. And as I said, he's expert on American foreign policy. So we're going to open this floor. My work is very easy today. I will ask questions and I'll cut answers. But I have nothing to do else. So you will ask your questions. I will provoke some questions to them. And then the audience, we want you, there's a microphone there. We want you to get up and ask your question to the panelists. So we make this a very live, real discussion. And the people throughout the world who are looking at this, wherever, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Dubai, Saudi, in the Caribbean, wherever, Africa, Ghana, they would want to come to Miami and be part of this. So next to Dr. Wallace, we have Dr. Jacqueline, and the reason why I need to have this very specific, Dr. Jacqueline E. Witt is an associate professor of strategy at the Air War College, Air University at Maxwell Air Force Base, Montgomery, Alabama, since 2012. She teaches the Foundations of Strategy course, the American Regional and Cultural Studies course for international officers. So it's very international here. And electives on the social and cultural history of the American military. And military, chaplains, international affairs have always been a concern of Muslims and have always been a concern of people in the world to get a better understanding of how America and the American leadership operates. And today, we're very fortunate to have these people with us in the panel. Then we have, on my left, Pastor Eric Wester. He is a retired Army colonel and Lutheran clergy. Chaplain Wester currently serves as assistant to the presiding bishop and director, federal chaplaincies for the Evangelic Lutheran Church in America, based in Washington, D.C. He works directly for the presiding bishop of Lutherans in the United States. His pastoral work supports more than 200 chaplains and chaplain candidates in the military, veterans, administration facilities, and federal prisons. When you speak of prisons and correctional institutions, these are areas that create a very important, lively discussion among people of all faiths and all walks of life. And we have Imam Asim Hafiz, Islamic religious advisor to the Chief of the Defense Staff and Service Chiefs. He looked very simple there, but he is the only Muslim in the British Army as an advisor to the British Army in the position and level that he holds. In October 2005, he was appointed as the first and only Muslim chaplain to the British Army Forces. We're very fortunate to have him with us to be part of the panelists this morning. So give them a round of applause. So, I would like to ask Dr. Wallace, seeing that we're starting from the right, but any one of the panelists can also answer questions, and then you all can also chip in and ask the panelists questions. We have the microphone there. We'd appreciate whoever wants to ask a question will come on the microphone so we can have a proper flow, and the cameraman will get you, and the people in the world will be able to see who's asking the question also. This may be or may not be a controversial question, but I heard you speak about it yesterday at the U.S. Southcom, and I know you're an expert on that. So, Dr. Wallace, we have in America God on the dollar. In God we trust. One nation under God. We have, the President of the United States of America, around his inauguration ceremony, he goes to the church. So we have so many very important things to do with God and the church, but yet we live in a country where we hear at times separation of church and state. How do we explain these things? And that's your field, constitution,
yes,
policy.
Yes. Religious liberty in the United States is established and governed by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which says that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The phrase separation of church and state, though, tends to be what we all know and what we all say. So when someone from another country says, how is religion treated in America? Most Americans say, well, separation of church and state. They're totally separate. That is not in the U.S. Constitution. In fact, the U.S. Constitution says very little about God. The oath of office of the President of the United States, which is prescribed in the Constitution, does not have the phrase, so help me God. That was added by George Washington the first time he took the oath of office, and it has been traditional or customary that is added, but that is not prescribed in the Constitution. Now, separation of church and state is a phrase that Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1802 in a letter to a religious community in Connecticut. Then 150 years later, in 1947, a Supreme Court justice took that phrase and put it in an opinion of the Supreme Court, which gave it the force of law. But the reality is that religion exists in all areas of society, all areas of life. And though it's convenient to say, well, there's separation, life is much more complicated than that. The president will give a message, and at the end of the message, he will say, God bless you and God bless America. Almost always they say that. There's nowhere that that's prescribed. That's just one person expressing their view and their feelings about things. And so we have to be clear on what the law actually says and doesn't say. But the one thing that is clear from the way the First Amendment is written, and that is that there's freedom of religion for all peoples. All peoples. Whatever religion, whatever their background, whether they believe or don't believe, there's absolute freedom guaranteed. The second thing is that there's freedom for there to be more than one religion. Often people from other countries look at America and say, well, you're supposed to be you're a Christian nation. Well, there's nowhere that it's prescribed that we are a Christian nation. The reality is that the majority of Americans, to some degree or another, claim to be Christian or from a Christian background. But Christianity does not have a superior place in America versus Islam or Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism or any other group. They're all equal, and that is guaranteed in the Constitution, that all religions have equal rights, equal freedom, equal respect. And so we should all respect one another. We should all appreciate one another. And we should all encourage one another, whether we agree theologically or not. Part of what we are in America is that you are as important as your neighbor, as myself, as Jackie, as anyone else. We are all equal in that respect, and that is guaranteed in the Constitution.
Dr. Jackie, you want to share some?
Sure, I would just like to add quickly, and before I say anything of substance, I should say I work for the U.S. government, but my views are my own. So what I'm getting ready to say is just from my point of view and from my academic study primarily. In addition to everything that Dr. Wallace just said, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is a very important concept of civil religion in the United States. And as many of you come from frankly much older societies and much older places, the United States is still very, very young, right? And one of the things about American identity is there is no ethnic group, there is no prescribed religion, there is no even prescribed language, there is no prescribed set of sort of familial ties that one has to claim in order to be American. One of you in the audience said you are something by birth and American by choice. Right, and this we hold quite dearly, that allegiance to the American nation, to the American state even, is something that is open to all if you adhere to a certain set of principles or values and live under the laws of the country. And one of the things that helps Americans do that is this idea of civil religion, which sort of fuses religious ideas with notions of civic duty and citizenship in some really interesting ways. A lot of times observers from the outside will look at Americans and the way we treat our Constitution as a sort of almost a sacred text, that it's we want to know what our founding fathers thought when they wrote it out. We read things like the Gettysburg Address from President Lincoln after the Civil War, or other documents like the Bill of Rights, and we hold those to be very dear because they are the things that express our values in the sort of center of that. And what it allows us to do then is to bring a lot of diversity in beliefs and backgrounds together under this sort of common umbrella. So you get things like under God in our Pledge of Allegiance, which again, that was added pretty recently, or on our money. And it can mean something to me that it means differently to Sheikh Shafayat, to someone else, and but it's a common language, a common way of speaking, and that has ramifications in the practice of specific religions, but also for American identity more broadly.
Okay, thank you very much, Reverend Wester.
Yes, thanks very much. I want to pick up on one word that Jackie mentioned, which was diversity. Part of the unfolding of the story of the United States of America is the expanding recognition and realization that it is a nation that is the adopted home of many, many people. I mean, over the centuries now, two and a half centuries, this has become the birthplace for people. But this is a land of migration, and we recognize that people bring their faith with them through their family or through their family heritage. And people in the United States, by and large, look at the diversity of the nation as one of its strengths, not as one of its problems. The other thing I'll add is, and I thought Dr. Wallace did a fine job, Jim did a fine job with this, about differentiating the fact that, in essence, we have a secular government that serves religious people. The makeup of the people in the United States includes a wide range of religious expression, but Americans are religious. We're not part of a government that's based on a religious model. It's a secular model of government that emphasizes individual conscience and respect for the choices that people make in their walk of faith.
Wonderful. So, Imam Asim, you want to share something? I know you're from the British land, but...
Yes, I guess from a UK perspective, it's very different because the monarch of the United Kingdom, currently Her Majesty the Queen, is head of the church, head of the state, and also head of the armed forces. Obviously, she doesn't get involved in running the government or running the armed forces, but ultimately she is the head. And the UK does have a very strong Christian identity, so we have an established church. But for people who aren't Christian, we don't necessarily see that as an impediment. Actually, we see that as a strength. That our country is based on or has a conscience and has principles, which means that when they are making decisions, they understand that they are not just answerable to themselves and to people, but they're also answerable to God. And I think that makes people of the diverse faiths that we have in the UK quite comfortable. But not only that, because Britain has a recognized faith, it means that it understands other faiths. It understands that people want to express their faith, and therefore the United Kingdom gives that recognition and provides equality. What's really interesting is Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, who is the next in line. Not that we wish that Her Majesty leaves us too soon. She's celebrating her 90th birthday soon, and she spent something like 70 years as the Queen, so she's the longest serving monarch in the United Kingdom, and she's done that job tremendously well, and her faith, I think, has played a huge role in her commitment to our country. So actually, we're quite proud of that. But Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, who is the next in line to the throne, has actually said, when I become king, I don't want to be the defender of the faith, I want to be defender of faiths. And I think that's really powerful, that he recognizes that his subjects, the people in the United Kingdom, are not a one faith, and that he feels uncomfortable saying, I'm only going to defend Christianity. Actually, I'm going to defend all of the people in the UK. So I think even though we have a slightly different example, I think there are strengths in both. And I'm personally, once someone approached me and said, are you uncomfortable that when Parliament starts, there is a Christian person that does a prayer? As a Muslim, you probably find that to be very uncomfortable when you're sitting in Parliament and watching on TV and there's a bishop who's Christian and he leads prayers from a Christian perspective. I said, no. I said, the more God these people can get, the better, because we want to make sure they make the right decisions. Thank you very much.
I know that our panelists got to be very cautious on what they say and how they say it because of their involvement with the government. But I just want to provoke another question. Now that we have heard all this from the constitutional point of view of religion and religions and faith, how politically correct, and you guys can choose to answer or not answer, how politically correct is presidential candidate Mr. Donald Trump when he says that he will ban Muslims from coming to the United States of America? And before you answer, I'd like to do a little adjustment with the microphone. Maybe if there's any one of you who would like to ask a question, and I want to encourage you to ask questions, we'll have one of our studio guys pass the microphone out for you. So just raise your hands so it would not be difficult for you to get up. They'll pass the mic for you, and very organized, we'll have the questions asked. So whoever wants to answer the question, start a doctor. How politically correct is he?
Well, I will try to answer this in a very careful way.
I know, you got to do that.
And my comments should be construed in no way as either supporting or not supporting any one candidate in any way. First off, I have listened to the news reports of his statement, and each time he makes that statement, he turns it just a little bit, so I'm not 100% sure. But from an American legal perspective, what he says is unconstitutional. It will be overruled by the Supreme Court.
Oh, okay.
You can try, you can stand on a political stump and make a speech and say, I'm going to do this. But there have been more than one case where a president attempted to do something and the Supreme Court said that violates the Constitution. And the reality is that what he has said in banning Muslims, or if he banned Buddhists, or if he banned some very small Christian sect or any kind of group, it won't happen. Because the Supreme Court, and I would venture to say, if it went before the Supreme Court, the ruling would be 9-0, because the legal jurisprudence on this is absolutely clear. And so I know that strikes a lot of concern and fear in the Muslim community. I have a number of Muslim friends, and I understand the consternation that would cause. But I would say, stand strong, and I'll tell you who will stand with you. The Christians will stand with you, and the Jews will stand with you, and the other religious groups will stand with you. Because if one group can be threatened in that way, if one group can be targeted in that way, we all can be targeted. And so it is illegal, it is unconstitutional, and I also think it violates the spirit of religious freedom in America, in which we all stand and support each other.
So hearing it from a man like you, foreign policy, international relations, and an expert on the Constitution, I think that's some sound information. That's powerful. I've never heard it said like that, because you hear a lot of things on the media, but when you hear it from people in authority, it's a whole different perspective. So Dr. Jacqueline, you want to share something on that?
Historians are less optimistic, perhaps, because I think the flip side of that, and I think Dr. Wallace again is correct. I think it is in fact illegal and immoral and many other things, but we also know that, and I believe wholeheartedly, the idea of diversity and religious freedom is central to the idea of America and the values that we hold dear. At the same time, we have a very, very long history of really messing things up. This is true. Of making the wrong decision before we get around to the right one. And this begins from the moment that Africans are brought over on slave ships, when Indians, Native Americans are displaced forcibly, when the Chinese are excluded under National Origins Acts, under immigration law, when blacks are discriminated against for 100 years between the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement, and continue, I think, to suffer from systematic and systemic forms of oppression and repression. So it's not to say that we don't always get it right. And quite often, we, our political leaders, can get it, frankly, very, very wrong. At the same time, I think that where there is hope and optimism is that more often than not, we fix it eventually. And if there are I'm apparently going to just keep talking about academic buzzwords, but if civil religion is one, then American exceptionalism is the other. And it's, right, this sort of two forms of it. One says America is different and better than everybody else, and everyone else should be like us. And that has its followers and its sort of prophets and its people who proclaim that. There's another side, and this is where I sort of fall personally, which is to say the idea of America is very, very good. And when we live up to our highest ideals, this is a good place to be. And that in order to live into those ideals, we have to critically examine our past. We have to bring to the forefront the places where we've messed it up rather royally, through discrimination or through hatred or through violence, and bring that to the forefront and talk about it and figure out where do we go from here? How do we live in to those ideals of freedom, of liberty, of democracy, of the promise of humankind? And so I am in the long term hopeful, but I think what Donald Trump has done, if there is a silver lining to all of this sort of fevered rhetoric, it has brought some of these things to the forefront. And it says we still, as Americans, have a long way to go, and we still have many miles and many conversations to have before we live into our ideals, where diversity and freedom and liberty for all human beings is a reality rather than simply an aspiration.
So anyone in the audience would like, if you pass the microphone. In the meantime, let me ask Pastor Wester, do you have anything to share on that, or should we take questions from the audience?
Well, when you invite a person who's a pastor or a cleric to speak, they usually will say, yes, I'll add a word. And my word is just tremendous gratitude for both the legacy of immigration in this country and the aspirations that immigrants represent for our nation. I think Mr. Trump and others in political leadership are steering in a dangerous direction when the theme focuses on fear. There are legitimate security concerns which get raised in these conversations. But I think that the vitality of this country and the foundations of this country will hold strong, particularly around immigration. And Dr. Witt laid out some tragic examples of the mistreatment of the other. And yet, what has emerged is people that have made that journey as immigrants and become a part of this nation, have added to the strength and fabric of the country. So I'm hopeful, but I think the hope has got to be the aim to get us past the rhetoric of fear.
Interesting. I suppose that's what, Dr. Witt and Dr. Wallace were talking about at the symposium in the last few days. The different, the court and the different areas will pick up their areas of responsibility, and it's not necessarily, every statement that a politician makes will have to take effect. So we got a question from the audience.
Yes, this question is for Dr. Witt in particular. I am British by birth. Before Trinidad became independent, I was born British, and I immigrated to Britain. So I hold a British passport and a US passport. So just in case Trump becomes president...
Is that legal?
I'm entitled to my British citizenship. The thing is here that as also a British citizen, if Trump becomes president, I can assure you, I'll ask Her Majesty to take back the colonies. That's one. Secondly, I think you said you were involved in strategy planning as well. And I think for one reason, for many reasons, I think for some, the United States government has been getting this wrong, and you're involved in culture as well. For instance, Iraq, there are 95% Muslims of the 1.7 billion Muslims in the world are Sunni Muslims. The rest 5 or 7% are Shia. It would appear from Sunnis like us that the government of the United States are supporting a Shia government in Iraq. Now, there could never be peace in Iraq once you have total support for people like the government that still exists today in Iraq. So I'm just wondering from you whether this was a strategic mistake by the government, and if so, are they trying to resolve this?
Sure, thank you. I'm going to refrain from commentary too much on concrete U.S. policy for all sorts of reasons that my public affairs folks want me to be careful of. But I do think I'll say two things broadly and very generally. The U.S. government and the strategic sort of apparatus before 9/11 in the early 2000s was not well prepared to talk about culture. It was not well prepared to talk about religion. It was not, frankly, well prepared to talk about history. And I think that has its origins in all sorts of things. I think people now are more aware, which I think is the first step, but it takes years in order to sort of build up the sort of expertise that is required to be able to look at a situation and to talk about some of the things that might happen, the things that are likely. And it requires the hiring of academic experts. It requires the hiring of people with deep knowledge in a region, with linguistic capabilities, and all of those things take time. So again, if I am hopeful, I am hopeful for the long term, but I think we do see very clearly the ramifications of not being culturally aware. At the same time, my challenge to my students and my challenge to policymakers is also to not become culturally deterministic, in which we believe that because someone is from a certain place or adheres to a certain faith or practices a certain religion or is from a certain family or a certain tribal group, that they must and will always act in a certain way. That human beings are remarkably adaptive, human beings are remarkably creative in figuring out how to maneuver and how to operate. And so that we have to treat all of the people we interact with as real agents with real choice and real capabilities to form their sort of own destinies, that no one is bound by their culture or by their religion to behave in one certain and entirely predictable way. So I think there's a balance there, and that's what my colleagues and I are trying very, very hard to do at sort of senior levels, is to teach this sort of nuanced and critical thinking. But I would agree broadly with the premise that we were not well prepared to do that and are suffering consequences for it.
Let me add a couple of things. I would absolutely concur with what Jackie has just said. We were not prepared. A survey was done of the U.S. Congress about the time that the U.S. entered Iraq in 2003. And the vast, vast majority of members of U.S. Congress didn't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia. And so we entered that war in ignorance, and we had high ideals and high aspirations, but we made some significant mistakes, and I think that's been acknowledged on many sides. I think the governments and the politicians are trying to make up for our mistakes and get some things right. As Jackie said earlier, we may not always do it right, but we try to figure out how to make it right. And right now, there's a Shia government in Iraq. The U.S. government has recently taken initiatives with Iran to have some rapprochement there, particularly on the nuclear issue. But also, President Obama, just yesterday, was in Saudi Arabia trying to address some issues there, and is in the Gulf states, even as we speak, trying to address some issues there. And the reality is, whichever side he tries to deal with or work with, he's going to be criticized. We have the same thing in the Middle East. So the United States has a long historical relationship with Israel and is very supportive of Israel. But the U.S. government has put hundreds of millions of dollars in trying to address issues in Palestine and in the West Bank and in Gaza, and trying to help establish a solid government there. But whichever side we work with, we're going to be criticized by the other side. And so the reality is, I think the United States is trying to be fair to both sides, but is always going to be criticized by the other side as well. You're being more fair to them instead of what you're being to us. And I ultimately don't think that the senior leaders in Washington are saying we're going to be biased towards the Sunnis, or we're going to be biased towards the Shias, or towards the Israelis or the Palestinians. I think they're trying to do right, but it's difficult. I had friends who were advisors of the government in 2003 before the U.S. went into Iraq, and they warned them. They warned the White House about the Sunni-Shia divide and the impact of that, and they were ignored. And I've been told of personal meetings that were held, and what they had to say was discounted and ignored. Now that's acknowledged as a serious mistake. And so one of the things that's great about America, we have the freedom to try, we have the freedom to make mistakes, and we have the freedom to try to get it right a second time. And a lot of people come to America for a second try at life. And it's good that we have second tries, because sometimes we blow it the second time and the third time. But at least in America, we have the freedom to try again.
So, Dr. Wallace, you know, you sound so interesting that I suppose if you had run against Sanders or Donald Trump, you would have been rating higher than them.
Dr. Wallace,
You're very influential.
I must tell you that as a Muslim, and as a practicing Muslim, well, 90%, I feel safer as a Muslim praying in the United States and Great Britain than praying in a Muslim country. That says a lot.
Thank you very much.
And I have a number of Muslim friends that have said the exact same thing to me. And that's why the freedom guaranteed under the Constitution for all religions is so important. Because you need that freedom. I'm a practicing Christian. I need that freedom. My Jewish friends, they need that freedom. And that's what's important.
Okay, so you know when you're on TV and you're on TV time, it goes faster than normal. So we have already crossed half an hour. So we want to make sure we get more questions from the audience so we could have some quicker answers and we can get more insight. So we'll have the microphone to Brother Khalid after Brother Manju.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
Again,
salam.
my name is Ali Noor Manju. My education background is political science and business administration master and also 2-year law degree. I will not go to a political side this time since it's an interfaith program. My question is, as a Muslim, we learn about all the prophets from Abraham to all the way Isa, Musa, David, Daud, and all other prophets comes to this messenger of God. What is your opinion, or do you ever learn anything through your holy book, whatever book you follow, is Torah or Injil or whatever, about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and also the religious Islam? Thank you.
Okay, we'll have the Reverend.
Delighted to answer. Thank you so much for the question. Chronologically, it would be unachievable to address the life and witness and ministry of the Prophet Muhammad through any of the sacred scriptures of Judaism or Christianity, just because of the chronology. Muhammad was in the 5th, 6th century AD, came after Jesus, after Moses, after all of the luminaries of Judaism and Christianity. Mm-hmm. So in terms of relying on scripture to inform us about Muhammad, that would not be possible. Now, in terms of religious formation and religious education, interfaith topics are one of a large range of different themes that get addressed in religion courses and seminary formation. So as religious leaders in Christianity learn about world religions, that would be a place where there would be some understanding. I'll give one example that kind of intersects the world of religion and security, because part of you mentioned I was a colonel and a chaplain in the Army. One of my assignments was teaching at the National Defense University. And I taught a course on religion and security. In the course, one of the requirements were for students to make a class presentation about a world religion other than their own. So it was an opportunity for students that practiced one faith to read about, learn about, and present the important principles of another faith. But in addition to doing that by research, I asked them to meet with and bring to class a practitioner of the faith. So we would have a Christian or a Jewish or a Hindu student in the class present on Islam and bring a practitioner of Judaism as a way of saying, well, that's how it's written, that's how it's described, but I want to also add, this is how it's lived. So I think there are opportunities for learning on an interfaith basis. And I think that's one of the main building blocks for interfaith cooperation is learning from our neighbors.
And I want to give credit to what Reverend Eric Wester said, and I want to do a little critic here on the Muslim community, which I should not really do publicly or worldwide, but from an educational point of view, I want to do it. And that is that, you know, just as the Reverend said that Muhammad, peace be upon him, came after Jesus, it means that Muslims should take the responsibility. And we were talking a little bit of, you know, dawah and God and prophets. Muslims are the one, like the Jews did not understand too much of Jesus, peace be upon him, because he came after. So it was a Christian's job to educate the Jews on who or what is Jesus, peace be upon him. Similarly, it's the Muslims' job to tell the Christians and Jews, well, who was Muhammad, and peace be upon him, and how he came, and when he came, and who was he affiliated to, because they would not have, in all reality, if they want to, they would make the studies, but our job should be to go out and make them better understand. And do you know, that's not an opinion. In the Quran, in chapter 3, verse 64, God Almighty says, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ. It's chapter 3, verse 64 in the Quran, that we are commanded as Muslims to call Jews and Christians to talk about areas of commonality. So I'm not sharing an opinion. I'm sharing a law from the Quran which says that Muslims should talk about Muhammad, peace be upon him, about God, about the Islamic perspective to the Jews and Christians, and the areas of commonalities that we believe in the same God, the same prophets, the same messengers, the scriptures. So it's more or less our job. I mean, I totally understand your question, and people of this level, they would of course study Islam and know a little bit of Muslims and Islam. So wonderful question, and I wish also a lot of Christians and Jews would go out of the way as leaders to study about Islam and Muslims so that they don't misrepresent. So we have another question from the audience, Brother Khalid Mirza.
Good morning, Shalom. Lately we're hearing lots about ISIS, and the media call them ISIS terrorist Muslims. As a Muslim, we don't believe they are Muslims, because no religion advocates killing innocent people, The only question I have, in the US, we are living in the biggest country, richest country with a lot of resources in the whole world. How come ISIS became so big and so strong all of a sudden? Nobody knew that. How we can prevent that? Because they are not that much. But again, the US had no idea. All of a sudden ISIS comes up and start killing. They kill more Muslims than non-Muslims. And nobody talks about that. Thank you.
So we'll have you on this side answer that question. And in addition to his question, I can chip my little piece. Do you think that ISIS represents Islam, or do they represent criminals? Add that also to your package.
Sure, it's very interesting. I would suggest from a American security perspective that many of us in this community feel like the threat of ISIS has been overstated. That the idea of it posing an existential threat to the United States is somewhat overblown, which is not to say that nothing should be done about it. Those are I think two different statements, but I do think it matters in how we're talking about the question, and it helps us to recognize that ISIS poses a much greater threat to the Muslim populations of Syria, of Iraq, of the surrounding countries. And so one of the things that I think is being encouraged at sort of in schoolhouses at least, where senior leaders are educated, is to remember that at the end of the day, it's not always about the United States, that there are other places that are under grave threat, and what you can do about that. Now, the flip side of that, whether they are Muslim or not, whether they are Islamic or not, for the most part, I prefer to leave that question to practitioners of the same faith. And so if Muslims tell me that they are not representative of the faith, I tend to believe that. In the same way that I would ask you to believe that, say, members of the KKK or Westboro Baptist Church are not representative of Christianity, or that members of say, the IRA are perhaps not representative of Catholics, and so on and so forth. But I think that also means that it is incumbent upon the faithful people who do adhere to a certain religion, both to denounce the acts of the extreme wings of a religious practice, and also not hide behind they're not us, right? They're not Christian, they're not Muslim, they're not Jewish, they're not Catholic, whatever it is, because they are certainly claiming that faith, right? And so I think that faithful people have to confront it head on, from a scholarly level, from an academic level, from an analytical level, from a practical, pragmatic level, and to say it loudly and strongly throughout, whether they are. And I think again, this dichotomy between religious extremists and criminals or thugs is probably too binary. It's neither nor, but it's some of both, and some of both is going to have to be part of the answer.
So before Dr. Wallace gave his response, I would like to share with our viewers worldwide who are viewing this program, Interfaith Views and Issues on Hikmat TV, that is 24/7 online, that we do have Imam Asim here with us, and he will be doing the khutbah or the Friday service today live on Hikmat TV. So viewers, you can stay tuned after this program who are viewing us worldwide to listen to Imam Asim. I know he's not saying much here because it's all about an American and religion here, but we'll have a lot more from him later on. So whoever has the next question, please, we'll have the microphone passed to you while Dr. Wallace is giving his response. You going to add to what she said?
I'm just leave it with what she said.
Okay, beautiful. Anyone else in the audience got a question? Otherwise, in the meantime, while you're thinking, I'm going to go to Imam Asim. Seeing that you are the first Muslim in that level, in the British Army, at that level as an advisor, etc., do you have any sort of negativity coming from Muslims? Because I once had a question online from a Muslim in London who said, is it halal for a Muslim to join the police force? And I mean, here we have a Muslim who is in the army forces. So here's a London Muslim asking me in America if it's permissible, Islamic, or is it haram for a Muslim to be part of the police force in London? And you are the highest force there in London. So what sort of repercussion do you face?
Yes, thank you very much, Jazakallah khairan, for that question. I think, when I first decided to take on this role, there was a huge challenge in terms of what it means to serve in the armed forces of the country that you're living in. And the view was you can't work for the armed forces, right? You can't be Muslim and work for the British Armed Forces. And my view was, no, that's absolutely wrong, because the armed forces are not about distinguishing between faith or not faith. The armed forces are about ensuring the security and the defense of our country. And so therefore, all people in Britain have an opportunity to serve within the armed forces. And the interesting thing is, I say to people sometimes that if Britain was under attack and the enemy was coming down the road, and the British Armed Forces were coming down the other side of the road, would you come out of your door and say, I'm Muslim, don't protect me? Or you're going to say, I'm British, please protect me? You're going to turn to the British Armed Forces. So unfortunately, the challenges and one of my greatest tasks have been to bring people together and to develop a bridge and a dialogue between the Muslim community and the armed forces. And I think the challenge is that the current conflicts that we've had over the last 10, 15 years haven't necessarily been articulated properly to our population, and therefore they have a misunderstanding about the war on terror or the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq actually being a war against Islam. I don't think that's the case.
As a person who have been, and I'm sure you've been in Afghanistan, Iraq, and all these hot places as a Muslim where the British Army or armies are, what sort of response you get from, let's say, radical Muslims and you being on that side?
Yeah. So I was just about to get to that point, having actually served with not only the UK Armed Forces, with the US Armed Forces too. Actually, I was stationed for 7 months in the US Marine headquarters in Afghanistan. And what I can do is, with that experience, I can speak to people in the UK and around the world categorically that when I was there for 7 months, nobody, and I was given privileged access, nobody said to me, oh, we don't trust this guy, he can't come into this room, or he can't listen to what we're saying. I was given full access, treated fully equally. And not once did I hear someone say, we got to destroy Islam, or we got to kill these Muslims. That just didn't happen. The war and conflict was not against Muslims, it was against terrorism, and it was against insurgency. And I think people need to bear that in mind. On occasion, I used to go and visit the local people, and they used to, first and foremost, be a little bit suspicious about who I am and what am I representing. You're working with
When
the
you
armed
say local
forces.
people, Muslims,
Muslims, local
they were
Afghan.
suspicious of you as a Muslim.
As a Muslim, yes.
Interesting.
Actually, I can remember once going to a government building, and the Americans and the British were let through totally without any kind of screening. But when they saw I was a Muslim, I was stopped and screened.
Wow. Isn't that interesting?
So when I went to meet Afghans on the ground, initially they were a little bit suspicious, because the view was, and this is a response to your question, sir, as well, Mr. Ali, is that the problem is there's a lot of propaganda in these parts of the world, and it's a two-way street. The same way, I guess, as Muslims or the Muslim world might want us to understand them, I think it's important that people try to understand others as well. It has to be reciprocal. It has to be a two-way street. And when I got to Afghanistan, they said, how can you be Muslim and live in Britain? You just can't do that. It's contradictory. I said, no, I can live in Britain and be a good Muslim. He goes, no, you can't really be Muslim there. You can't be Muslim and live in the US because it's not a Muslim country. And I said, look, that's the only country I know, and I can be just as good Muslim in the UK as I can here in Afghanistan. And that was shocking for them, because their view is, if you don't live in a Muslim country, you have to leave that country to be a good Muslim. And that's why we have to play a role in raising awareness amongst these people that actually, no, in these countries we have freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and they don't need to worry that somehow the West is here to destroy their religion and to destroy their culture and to kill Muslims, because that's not the case. So what was really interesting is, by having that dialogue, they were actually very grateful. They said, we're really grateful that you've come to us and spoken to us about this, because we've been told something totally different. And through you coming and telling us this, now we will be able to ensure that we have a good understanding of what these countries represent.
And I suppose a person with your background, with your experience in the army and at that level, I mean, a program like this, hence the reason, credit to Mr. Colonel Chaplain Lemke for having these dignitaries here this morning, because what we're going to do with this program, in addition to it being broadcasted live today, we're going to have this online. It's going to be on YouTube. We're going to have it sent out to you. Before you leave, we'd ask those of you in the audience to put your email address and contact number. We could send it to you, and you could send it to families and members and people all over the world, so people can hear a different perspective. This is not just people off the street talking here. This is a man, the only one of his type in the British Army. These are people, advisors in the government, experienced in the Christian and American policy and international relations. You're hearing it not in a campaign trail, you're hearing it from people with authority. And this is what I think the Muslim world needs to hear, as well as the non-Muslim world. So I want to give you, the audience, a homework, and those of you who are listening to us online, send us some comments and send us your email address or whatever. We could send you back this link so it can go out worldwide and people can send it off. So those who were not able to view this program, they would be able to still see it online. So we have a question from the Colonel, but let's take your question.
Based on today's conversation and your presence here, one thing I'm determined that you know a bit about Islam and the Muslim. You already understand that the ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or any other group not represent Islam, what is supposed to be. So do you guys have any specific plan to stand next to us and explain to the rest of the world that those are the people is not the representation of Islam? True Islam is a peaceful and something beside what they think. It's a question for all of you, and especially for Imam Asim. Since you are a Muslim Imam, do you have any specific, special event did you organize or you have planned to do anything what express rest of the world about the Islam, what they think is not really that it is? Thank you.
All right, so before this, let's take your question also. So because we are zooming down on time, 10, 15 minutes, I'm trying to extend the time because, you know, the good thing is that we're on God's time and we're on Al-Hikmat time. So we're not on CNN time that we have to pay for it. So we could go a little 5, 10 minutes extra, but I want to get it as much as possible.
I had a question for Imam Asim. In terms of the Protestant Catholic chaplains, the padres in the British Army, do you have a lot of conversations with them, either formal or informal, and what are those conversations like?
All right, so the response we're going to get, you can also respond to Brother Manju and Colonel.
I'll respond to yours, Mike, first, if that's okay. There is a conversation going on between Christian chaplains and Muslim chaplains within the armed forces. And I think that's important to reflect on, because what the chaplains in the armed forces do is provide a service for people within their care. And these chaplains, regardless of their own faith, provide a service for everybody that's under their care, regardless of what their faith is. So, you know, if a soldier called me up from Scotland and I'm in London and he needs help, I rely on my Christian colleague in those barracks to go and see him and provide support to him. You know, some people say, no, you can't do that, he might convert him. But no, we work as a team and we respect each other's religions. Someone said that understanding of each other's religions is very, very important, because if you only know one, you don't really know any. So we have this dialogue within the armed forces between Christian chaplains, between Muslim chaplains. We have a Hindu, Jewish, Sikh, Buddhist. And what we do is we attend each other's religious functions, and that gives us an insight into people's faiths. And actually, when we get to the bottom of it, most of the principles are universal principles. You know, we want to be committed to God. We want to live a clean life. We want to ensure we look after our neighbors. We want to ensure that we are truthful, and you know, we are able to be committed citizens of our country through commitment to our faith. So there's a lot of dialogue going on within the chaplaincy department, but also outside in the local population too, because, you know, people want to tell us that religion is on the way out, you know, but religion is not on the way out. Religion is important. Religion matters, and whether people like it or not, you know, it's a faith-based world. You know, 90% of the world believe in a faith. And those people who don't believe in a faith, I'm sure we can have a dialogue about what values and principles that we can all buy into. So religion is important. Religion is a way in which people view themselves. Religion is a way people view others. And therefore, we need to definitely have a good interfaith dialogue. And I commend Sheikh Shafayat for organizing this kind of event that people around the world can actually see that here in the US, Muslims can have the freedom to establish, you know, an interfaith dialogue where communities can come together here in a mosque, in Al-Hikmah Center, to discuss faiths freely without anybody bothering them. And I think these are the values that we really need to promote outside in the world, because unfortunately not many people want that story to get out.
Dr. Wallace, in addition to your response.
To answer your question, you know, what are we doing to help others understand? First of all, I teach. I teach young minds, and I try to give them a perspective that they haven't had much of before. Secondly, I am involved, along with others here and other places, in interfaith dialogue. But both of those are important, but that to me is not the most important thing. The most important thing is I have friends, I have people I love who are Muslim, and I eat with them, and I cry with them, and I share their pain of their families, and I live life with them. And by doing it, I hope to demonstrate what I not only believe and dialogue about, not only what I teach about. That is the way we're going to get this changed, is that we can't just make this an intellectual exercise. It has to be a life experience. And you reach out to us, we reach out to you, we reach out to each other. That's where this will begin to change. And I commend our president and previous presidents for having, on significant religious holidays, religious leaders into the White House to eat together. Because that is one of the most sacred things I think we can do with each other, to come to know and understand each other, and that is to break bread together. And I hope we'll all continue to do that.
Wonderful response. Reverend?
I'd like to comment on this.
Okay.
So often when you mention the way that religion matters, it tragically gets directly connected to religion and conflict, religion and division, religion and violence. There's another way that religion matters, which is religion matters in building up community. I wanted to mention two particular ways in which interfaith experience operates from the community of faith from which of which I'm a part of. And I thought, Dr. Wallace, when you mentioned about eating together or extending hands toward one another, those are beautiful images. In 2007 or 2008, and if you Google the phrase shoulder to shoulder, you'll read a description of more than 30 denominations and faith groups that together rallied around what was at the time the emerging anti-Islamic tones in the United States of America. Shoulder to shoulder was a commitment of numerous faith groups to say, we are in this as people of faith together, and we are with you. And in my own denomination, in December of this year, or 2015, the most recent December, the presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America issued an open letter to the Islamic community. So if you Google Bishop Eaton, E-A-T-O-N, and read her open letter, it talks about the love of the Lutheran community for our Islamic neighbors. And she leaned on the centrality of this humility under God, but love for neighbor, which can be a sign of upholding one another. So there's genuine commitment to this, not only at the personal level, which means so much, but at the life of religious organizations and their leadership.
Okay, wonderful. So due to time, I'm gonna ask one more question, and we'll have one more question from the audience, and we'll conclude. However, so we have a sister raise her hands. We'll let you ask that question, but let me ask this question, and that's a follow-up to what has been happening. Again, because this is a year of election. Let's be very real. It's a year of election. You tune on the television, that's all you hear and you see. We have had a lot of negative things, and we have had a lot of positive things about Muslims and Islam by the presidential candidates, by all of them. You had some of them very positive on Islam and the balanced way, some very negative, some make, and I wouldn't call the names, but you can call it political, it's on the news, some making statements as much as a Muslim should never and would not be recommended to be a president of America. I mean, even though the present president is President Hussein, right? Oh, they just call him Barack Obama, but his middle name is Hussein. So we could say President Hussein, and you want, wow, of America, yes. Isn't that right? However, my point is, with all this sort of, the election is such a big thing, and the presidential office is the highest office in America, and if at that level you have this kind of, ignorance and comments on religion and people, and sometimes race and religion, and I'm opening this up to you, the Reverend, and to everybody else, what do you guys recommend with your experience, your spiritual, religious background, religion matters in the world, in America, you're in politics, political analysis, policy making, etc. What do you recommend, and how do you see organizations, military organizations, civilian organizations, how do you see these people coming together and working together for security and stability in the world? At the end of the day, that's the analysis, that's the result we want to see, some kind of working relationship in all these different areas. So we won't have the breakdown of, you guys are soldiers and law enforcement, you have hate, you have no God, you are this, you don't believe in God, we believe in God, and you're a politician, and I'm a businessman. You are the experts, the chaplains and the army. Who wants it? I pose a question to you.
Yeah,
we have one more question from the audience after, and we'll conclude.
You've pointed to me a couple of times, and I think it's important to emphasize, and this in a way gets us back to our first question about establishment and the nature of the relationship between religion and government in this country. It's improper for religious organizations to become the sponsor of a political program or candidate. There's a way in which we have a clear emphasis on the right of individual decisions about voting. So voting a certain way is not directly connected to somebody's particular religious convictions or expression. However, religion informs identity and values on a very profound level, and it's exactly at the heart of what happens in religious education and public preaching about the values that guide our life together in politics, in civil society, and community. So religious leaders, I think, are in a role to truly emphasize, what are the core values that can inform the way people vote and inform people that run for public office and aspire to public service. What are the core values? And in our faith tradition, it has to do with love of God and love of neighbor. So I'm always listening for, in what way does this political message express love of God or love of neighbor? And that becomes, for me, one lens to use in some of this rhetoric. And it certainly informs what happens, I think, in the lives of faith practitioners and believers. How do I connect my faith convictions to what I'm hearing and the people that are expressing these points of view? So I hope that's of some help, because religious leaders are not going to be in a position to endorse candidates in the same way that political leaders will quickly tie their string onto the kite of some rising politician.
Excellent. But at the end of the day, as we were saying earlier on over the past few days, that America is 85% plus godly people, God-conscious people. So it doesn't matter how much we separate the politics and the church and the state and technicalities, we're talking of a majority of God-conscious minded people. And it's important, as Colonel Lemke had a whole symposium over the last few days, that religion matters for chaplains and soldiers. I think we need to let the world know religion matters and people of God matters. And that's, if you don't have people of your level and everyone else giving that message and making that happen, we cannot say that people are 85+% godly and then we don't show that religion and God matters. It's important. So we have your comments. We'll come here and then the last question.
I just wanted to comment on that question. 3 things, really. The first thing is what we need to make our political leaders aware of is that when they use religion as a means to persuade people to vote in a particular way, when they misuse religious identity as a means to persuade people to vote in a particular way, they're only benefiting one people, and that is the radicals. So we need to ensure that they understand that, because by doing that, they're not making our society safe, they're making it more insecure. So they need to ensure that they don't use or misuse religion, because then what is the difference between the good people and the bad people? And I think that's really important. Secondly, one thing we did in the UK when some of our senior politicians or showed signs that they may be, ignorant about a particular faith, and in this case, Islam, particularly our current Prime Minister David Cameron, we approached him and said, look, we think you need to know a little bit more about Islam. And he said, how are you going to do this? We said, what you need to do is you need to go and spend the weekend with a Muslim family. And so we got him to go to Birmingham, one of the largest cities where largest Muslim population is. And he spent a weekend living with a normal Muslim family, waking up with them, eating with them, going to the mosque with them. And when Drummer Lee Rigby was killed, who is a British soldier who was beheaded on the streets of London, he came out on number 10 Downing Street with the number 10 door behind him, and he said, this is not a representation of Islam, this is a betrayal of Islam. And when he said that, the whole community, the whole country was united against any form of extremism, whether it was Islamic extremism, whether it was Christian extremism, whether it was far-right extremism. All religious leaders came together. So what we need to do is we need to get our religious leaders to be confident to speak a religious language in a positive way. The last thing I'd like to say is about Mr. Trump. When Mr. Trump talks about banning, I guess, Muslim communities or Muslim people from Britain, what he says, I think we've misunderstood him. What he says is that we need to figure out what's wrong before we can allow Muslims to come in. I think we should give him that time. So let him figure it out, because when he sits down and figures out whether he should allow Muslims in this country or not, what he will realize is sexism, racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and exclusion is not the way forward of creating a positive country.
Thank you very much. Thank you again. And I would really want to give you about 2-3 seconds, everybody, as closing remarks, and then we'll go off.
The Christian scriptures have a verse that says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. In the season of electioneering, when a lot of people are doing a lot of speaking, I think we need to do more listening to each other. We need to do a lot less getting angry. And if we do, it will change things.
Thank you very much.
Over the past 2 days, I've challenged the chaplains in the group in particular to do what I call is living in the middle. And I would challenge you all to do the same, which is to live in the middle of communities, to live in the middle of ambiguity, of gray spaces, of the unknown, to not be paralyzed by the amount that we don't know, by the fear that can sometimes overwhelm us, but to instead be inspired by it, and to live in the spaces that are sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes even dangerous, but that I think can lead us to greater knowledge and greater understanding of the world that we live in.
Thank you very much.
When Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, the question that came back to him was not, what does it mean to love? It was, who is my neighbor? And I want to affirm the benefits of recognizing the neighbor in people of different faiths. So I want you to think of me as your neighbor, and I certainly want to be looking at you as my neighbor and widen that view all around the world. So thank you so much for your hospitality.
So the Quran talks about the universality of humanity, that we are all one. And in the Quran, God says that all people, you all came from the man and the woman, and then God separated you into nations and tribes, so that you could get to recognize each other and understand each other, not so that you can despise and hate each other. And the only people that have a right to see themselves to be more noble than another is the one who is God conscious. So let's see that as a means of being good and noble in society, not necessarily what our whether the color of our skin is, or what particular label of faith that we use, because what God says in the Quran is ultimately you all came from Adam and Eve, and ultimately you all go to the earth, and ultimately you will all be brought up in front of God as one humanity, not with, I don't think God on the day of judgment is going to say, well, Muslims over here, Christians over here, Jews over here, Hindus over here. And therefore the Prophet Muhammad also said, all people are like one body. If the head hurts, then the whole body hurts. And if the hand hurts, then the whole body hurts. So we should all synchronize like one body and move forward together just the way our bodies move forward together. Thank you very much.
And to our viewers worldwide, we want to thank you very much for tuning in to Al Hikmat TV. You've been viewing Interfaith Views and Issues live from Al Hikmat TV. If you would like to get a link of this program, please feel free to contact us at Al Hikmat so we can send it out to you worldwide, and you can pass this very educational, very religious, and a very strong united force that you have seen here today. You can spread this message out through your contacts by getting the link from Al Hikmat office. Thank you very much, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. May the peace and blessing of God be upon you.